So as you saw from last week, I managed to get the tarp over the boat and get it covered. But before I started any big projects, I wanted to monitor it for any leaks. So this week I decided to get a couple little things out of the way and do a small test project. So in my quest to dry out Puffin, I've been using a diesel heater. But the only problem with that is the battery I've been using isn't the most ideal one for it. So one of my first little jobs to do is to install this little trickle charger. Now it's only a cheap one from Amazon, but I thought I'd give it a go to see if that'll help the battery last a bit longer. Now as I'll be doing a lot more woodwork now, I thought it's about time I changed my blunt blades on my chop saw and my circular saw. The chop saw one had turned up, but the circular saw one will be turning up tomorrow. Something else to help the diesel heater along is these dehumidifier blocks. Not sure if these will work well, but hopefully it will cut down the condensation inside and outside the boat. So as I was saying earlier, my battery situation on the diesel heater isn't the most ideal. So I'm hoping this trickle charger will actually keep the battery topped up and allow me to run the diesel heater for a bit longer. I'm not sure how well this will work under the tarp, but I'm going to give it a test and see if it helps. It's a pretty much straightforward install, there's not much to it. A couple crocodile clips and just putting the solar panel somewhere where it gets light. So the next day my other order arrived. I've got to order some masking tape for some of my future projects, and the other blade for my circular saw had arrived. So seeing as I was going to be using this very soon, I decided to get both the blades changed round. And you'll see from the state of my old blade and my fiddling about, I hadn't changed it for quite some time. Now the new blade was much more fine tooth for a cleaner cut. Now my chop saw blade was really ruined, and it was a general purpose blade. As you can see again, I've got another fine toothed one, so I could actually do clean cuts on this as well. So my next job was that little test project I was talking about. So with the design of my boat, I'm going to attempt to kerf bend a lot of plywood. So first of all I wanted to make sure I could actually do it, as well as wriggling out any problems in the process of bending the plywood before I start cutting the actual panels for the boat. So I still had some plywood left over from when I attempted to do the bulkhead at the bow of the boat. Now you might be screaming to me about the wastage here, but when I did the bulkhead I noticed so many voids in this wood, I don't really have faith in it, so I thought I'd use it for this. So after setting up a little cutting area in the cockpit of the boat, I used a circular saw to clamp down some 2x4 as a guide rail for cutting off a small piece. What a difference a new saw blade makes. This thing was like knife through butter, and it left such a nice cut. Now one thing you might notice already is that it's actually quite dark, and all I currently have is a head torch. I've yet to sort out some kind of lighting for doing work on a boat. So now I've got a nice little square piece of ply, it's time to start working out how to do the kerf bending. Now if like me you've looked into this, you'll see a lot of YouTubers that do kerf bending recommend this website. It takes away a lot of the guesswork, gives you all the details you need of distances and how many cuts to make, but you can also adjust it very easily. As you can see here, you can put everything from wood thickness to the angle you want the curve to do. So now I have all the measurements I need, it's time to mark out the wood and get ready to cut. But by the time I'd done this, it was a bit too late to be cutting down the boatyard. There's residents nearby. So I took the wood home to cut it in a shed. So after clamping some wood down and adjusting the saw blade to the right depth, it's a simple case of making 26 cuts. And this is what it looks like when it's done. I have to say, I was quite impressed myself, and it does actually bend. Being the first time I've done this, it's quite an interesting thing to do. Now my next job was to tease it into a 90-degree position, bending it slowly. Now I only had 2 clamps, so I used some elastic tie downs, but I did notice it starting to crack already. And I remember people saying that you can actually wet the outer layer of ply to help it bend, so I thought I'd give that a try. So the camera doesn't pick it up too well, but there's one crack where the first bend started. But remember what I said at the beginning of the video? This is exactly why I'm doing this, to iron out any kinks in the process I need to do. But afterwards, the water did work, and I managed to get it bent past the 90 degrees. So hopefully, what that'll mean, in the morning when I take the clamp off and it springs back, it'll still bend back to the 90 degrees and I'll be able to clamp it in that position. I did notice as well, you can see where each cut is and where it's bent in that way, but I'm wondering if that's where I didn't cut deep enough and maybe I need to cut right down to the last sheet of ply to give a smoother bend. But that's it for today. I'm going to leave that overnight and hopefully that'll dry out and I'll be able to epoxy it in place. So it's the next day and it's time to take the clamps off and to see if this has worked and I can ply it back into position easily. And yes, it has worked. The plywood bends easily back into place either way and no more cracking has occurred, so I'm happy with that. My next task is to figure out a way of actually keeping them parallel and at the right angle whilst they're clamped and the epoxy's drying. So I measured the gap and decided to cut some scrap wood I have to hopefully hold it at 90 degrees. The health and safety executives among you will notice my chop saw's not exactly 100% safe. So it was a bit fiddly, but eventually I did get both of the pieces of wood clamped down, and then after checking it did actually work in getting it as close to 90 degrees as I needed to for this little test project. I always seem to forget one thing, and this week it was the stirrers. I'd run out, so I had to run home and find my oldest spatula to use as a stir stick. So I mixed up some thickened epoxy, filled up a piping bag with it and got ready to fill 26 gaps in the wood. So it wasn't the easiest thing to do. I don't know if it was whether the piping bag was a bit too flimsy or maybe the mixture was a bit wrong, but I used a spatula to get the squeeze out back in the holes as much as I could and to smooth it out a bit. So next was just to get it clamped up, getting the last bits of squeeze out back in the holes and to leave it overnight, hopefully set in the right position. So here we have it. The next day, the epoxy seems to have set quite well. You can see the cracks a bit more apparent in the daylight. And the other thing I'd tried to do was dye the epoxy. It's just an idea I'm working on, but that didn't work too well. But let's just get these clamps off and test the strength of this. So yeah, I'm happy with that. It's a bit messy, well, very messy, but it's very strong. Just got a few kinks in the process to work out to make it a bit prettier. But yeah, job done. Don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it and subscribe to the channel to keep updated with any new videos. See you again soon.